Well, I'd been to Afghanistan previously. That was my first covering of a war. But I had written for Rolling Stone for a few years. And the short answer is I would always write about youth subcultures like skateboarders, criminals, radical environmentalists. And I pitched my editor the idea that, hey, I'll cover the military. It's another youth subculture. But I think the other reason I wanted to go to Iraq was I studied history in school. I was fascinated by war, actually. And I'd also previously worked at Hustler magazine as an editor there. And I always felt that when I worked at Hustler, we were beneficiaries of the First Amendment. And I thought, now here's another way to live the First Amendment. The military is giving me the opportunity to cover the war from the front, and I feel that I ought to. When I first covered troops, it was in Afghanistan, and I spent a month with a heavy weapons platoon in Kandahar. And with those guys, I was always sort of like, should I let them know that I worked for Hustler? Because I thought maybe they'll be angry or it'll offend some born-again Christian or something. And it got out, and it really increased my respect and acceptance in that platoon. So by the time I got to Iraq, or to the Marine Corps prior to the invasion of Iraq, I kind of knew in a manipulative journalistic way that Hustler was a good card to play. But it's more of a humorous thing. I knew that they would laugh about it. What really, I think, made them accept me as much as they did, and not everyone accepted me, was just the fact that I stayed with them. And I believe in journalism, nothing beats time and persistence. Just follow people around, and it breaks down the barriers. The fact that I followed them around after we were getting shot at and ambushed, of course, also helped. In Afghanistan, we had some rocket attacks, and there were big issues with landmines that were blowing people up. That was a different sort of tension. The first time, in fact, it was a worse. Just the fear of landmines that we had in Afghanistan was worse than actually being shot at. And the first time I was really shot at was at the bridge at Nasiriyah, which will be depicted in episode 2 of the miniseries, and it was strangely enough, very exciting. And it was strangely enough, and this was voiced by Marines that were by my side. It was like, wow, this is just like a movie. And it's weird to me that my reference point and their reference point was movies, but that's the case. It was, to see, and for some reason to have a mortar blow up sort of near you, and you feel the overpressure, and to see machine gun fire tearing into trees over your head, even though it's scary, it's very exciting. Well, I think that they were all dangerous. Once you start getting shot at, who knows? But who knows what's going to happen? But for me, this happened time and time again. We were in a convoy moving forward, so at times a unit would have moved ahead of us, and they would say, okay, you're going to have enemy contact in 5 minutes when you reach this turn in the road. So then you're in the Humvee, and hey, the last guys that drove up here, they took RPG and machine gun fire. It's going to happen to you next. It was the anticipation that was always the scariest. When I came back from Iraq, a lot of my friends were like, oh, wow, you were in combat. It must be you saw something that no one else could ever understand unless they'd been there. And actually, I disagreed with that. The weirdest thing is there was an element of being in combat that confirmed to me what I'd read about it. And studied history, so I'd read a lot about it. And it was weird, as a writer and a person who's sort of lived the life of the imagination, I was like, wow, it's really cool that my imagination did actually prepare me for what combat would be like. So there was an element of it that was very familiar based on my intense reading as a history student. But the one thing that I really saw in Iraq graphically, and I'd never quite understood, was how attractive war is for the combatants. That basically in Iraq you had these young Marines who had prepared for war, and it was pretty exciting for them to finally get a chance to be in it. And on the other side, many of the people that were attacking us were professional Iraqi soldiers. Now, many of them were actually working as insurgents because the Saddam's military had prepared for an insurgency as we invaded, but they were professional combatants. So you had these young men on both sides that were sort of fulfilling their dreams. It was very self-actualizing for the Marines, as I'm sure it was for the Iraqis. And it was war is attractive to those guys. But in between is this mass of civilians who are being slaughtered, who are suffering. And I'd never quite realized, A, that for combatants, war is kind of attractive, and B, that truly what happens in war is just civilians just get fucked. You know, there is no glory, there's nothing for them except for pain, misery, death, suffering. And you really see it in Iraq. I really saw it there.